It's somewhat of a basic understanding of mine, a sort of working hypothesis, if you will, that for myself, as a general rule, and I would suggest also this is the case with others, but I will speak for myself here in order to lend a more pronounced degree of conviction or whatever to this idea that in more or less everything that I do, the sense or belief about why I was doing such a thing, why I was conducting myself in such a way, the motivations for such are, as Michael Kerr, I believe, puts it in his book Dispatches, about the Vietnam War, as he puts it in that book, that people were simply behaving and they would apply or tell themselves whatever story about why they were acting the way that they were after the fact. And I would say that that's the case also for myself and the things that I do. At the time, I'm simply behaving, and it's in retrospect that the narrative is applied. It's a series of post-rationalizations that occur. The narrative is constituted of such. It is a post-rationalization. And so with that in mind, when it comes to the recent slew of videos that or more appropriately, recordings that I've produced, the post-rationalization, the narrative, the retrospective narrative, as it currently stands, is that the telos, if you will, seems to be of attempting to convey more esoteric ideas for the ideally entertainment and ultimately acceptance, but primarily simply entertainment of a more skeptically minded person, someone whose life way hitherto has led them to be naive to these ideas or simply wholly incredulous of them. And of course, incredulity would predispose them to being naive, because they would never be in a energetically conducive state to be resonant with such. And I suppose in discussing these ideas, attempting to discuss these ideas, something that's become quite clear is the ways in which I've been self-censoring, the ways that I've been basically forcing myself to dance around employing the use of certain terminology, specific words, specific phrasings, as I know all too well of the effect that they are likely to produce in one who is inherently incredulous of these ideas. And that is because such words, these trigger phrases, have, as I understand it, very specific connotations to those that are likely going to misinterpret what I'm saying. They will misinterpret as a result of simply having these, by virtue of the fact of possessing such connotations with these words, and not perceiving, not being able to entertain the idea that such words, such phrasings have these cross-contextual applicability. And that's, as I see it, a more broader issue that isn't specific to simply this arena, this field of discussion of these esoteric ideas. It's more so universal, ubiquitous, as it relates to the popular use of language. Certain words, certain phrasings are tethered to specific contexts, seemingly inextricably so. Basically, to kind of reiterate, a specific word, a specific phrasing is seen as specific to a specific context, and there is no possible, it's a complete void of, a complete constraint placed upon one's perceptions as to the potential cross-contextual applicability of such a word. And so, a certain word, certain phrase, say, that I've been avoiding the use of as it relates to this recent slew of recordings, is magic. As I see it, would be very much applicable to that of which I have been speaking. It would be much simpler for me to simply state that the implementation of such and such a system of attempted control is an act of black magic. It's a particular methodology that's employed to realize a specific goal of a specific individual or set of individuals, or incarnate force. It's the means by which they realize their will. And so I would suggest that for the skeptical person, magic in their mind is the connotations thereof relate to, or would produce in their mind, such images of a magician at a children's party, or Harry Potter or something, right? And for someone to be putting forth this idea of magic as if it were a topic worthy of serious consideration, of serious discussion, that such a thing is wholly farcical, is humorous, basically, in nature, that it must be some sort of joke. And I suppose, from my position, the way I see it is that in some way, particularly in relation to this Harry Potter franchise, one could make the case that there's something of a deliberate ploy to produce just such an effect as what I've previously outlined. This marrying this concept of magic, constraining it to this very narrow band of connotations, really just kind of corralling it into this very isolated contextual framework, and completely erasing this possibility of any cross-contextual applicability. But so, that out of the way, I suppose now I should make my case as to what magic actually is, in my view, and how it is part and parcel, basically, of everyone's experience. How it is impossible to engage oneself with reality in its absence, that it is basically synonymous with one's engagement with reality. And how kind of unwittingly one is being likewise influenced by other people's magical workings, by other magicians, white or black, right? One is at the mercy of such machinations at all times. So, I suppose as a kind of definition, as is often the case when people try to break this subject down, I will resort to Aleister Crowley's definition of what magic is. And if you are a kind of skeptical, incredulous, naive party to all of this, surely you will not probably know who, I assume, right, who Aleister Crowley is. So, I guess, in short, he's basically one of the foremost notorious occultists of the 20th century. A very charismatic figure, implemented in a great many sort of cultural movements and historical moments, speculative or otherwise, of the 20th century. Was very influential upon art and music, particularly, the kind of cultural revolution of the 60s and moving forwards into such things as heavy metal, and so on. But if you're curious, of course, you know where Wikipedia is and so on, so just peruse his bio or whatever, if you feel so inclined. So, anyway, his definition, I just sort of loosely as I can recall it, just a general kind of paraphrasing of it, as I can't remember it sort of ad verbatim, is the ability or systemized practice of causing change to occur within reality in accordance with one's will. And so it's a very general definition, and by virtue of the fact of such a general definition, you can probably see already how very basic and I should hope also perhaps relatable to your own experience this is. So I suppose, as an example, one of the most simple ways you can see this as being relatable to one's experience is in such things as persuasion, and I guess a more kind of nefarious, pernicious form of persuasion, which would be manipulation. This sort of also ties into the distinction between white and black magic. White magic would be more of this benign, sort of persuasive in nature, wherein one would sort of work in communion with the parties that one was seeking to influence. It would be this sort of mutual cooperative exchange. One would seek to not infringe upon the rights of another in the realization of their own desires, of their own will. That would be at the kind of forefront of their mind, this sort of ahimsa practice of doing no harm. And of course that may also be a net result of just an overall profit for everyone and anyone involved in these magical workings of the magician, right? And sort of inversely with black magic, this manipulative, this kind of basically manipulation is the basis of it, right? It's very underhanded, sort of surreptitious. That's how you fucking pronounce that word. Quality to it, where one is being very serpent-like. It's working sort of under the cover of darkness, hoping that one is not uncovered in what they're doing, one is not exposed. It's work through suggestion and these very underhanded practices. It's basically, I mean, yeah, this is how you could sort of define manipulation, right? It's like an underhanded form of persuasion. It's very disingenuous. It's acting in bad faith. You're not being upfront with your intentions, and you're working primarily from a place of egocentricity, of egotism. You're thinking only of yourself, not of how your actions are going to possibly infringe upon the well-being of others, how your actions are going to impact others. And so anyway, with this persuasion, say we will work with this basic idea of persuasion. One is going to be employing, say one wants to have a particular outcome, right? And in order to get from point A to point B, they are going to use language to as a means to facilitate this process by stating things in such a way as to other people get what they desire out of other people. Forming this sort of, spelling, right? You can sort of see the relationship there immediately. One spells with words, one constructs certain sentences, certain phrases that are going to, from the point of view of the magician, elicit such and such results. I guess you can sort of see what I'm saying there, perhaps. So that's a very basic way of looking at it, and you can see how different it is fundamentally to this sort of caricature that most people have in their minds when it relates to magic, thinking of this very sort of ceremonial, ritualistic thing, sort of that relates to all this, stereotype paraphernalia of potions and robes and skulls and daggers and sigils, black cats, all of this all of these tropes. And certainly there is a place for all of that, but it doesn't necessarily the intention behind the application of such and such paraphernalia is not, and the rituals themselves isn't necessarily aimed towards invoking any spirits or entities in order to aid them in their the fulfillment of their desires, the realization of their will. Although there is an aspect to that, but of that to that, there's also this more, much more sort of prosaic nature to it, wherein it sort of functions in the same or similar way, or as basic and relatable a way as the first example I gave of persuasion. And so basically how it works is that it's sort of going through this process of discipline and ritualization to influence one's own subconscious, to condition one's subconscious with this sort of repertoire of symbology, as it lends a kind of gravity to what is being done. It sort of ties this, basically sort of consolidates one's intentions, maybe a good way of putting it. It focuses the will and imprints one's subconscious with the profundity of this intention. And thenceforth, the subconscious will this intentionality will begin to sort of foment within the subconscious, and the machinations of the subconscious, independent of the consciousness of the ego of the I, will begin to produce this the fruits of this intentionality, of this intention of its own accord, right? The results will begin to sort of manifest within one's experience. And kind of a real world translation of this, I suppose the perfect sort of example is of businessmen, right? Who adorn the business suit that is their sort of ceremonial garb, as it is like the warlock's robe, say. And they have their briefcase, and they have their little pens with like the sort of like all that sort of regalia, and they have their special secret handshakes, and they have their own sort of vernacular that's basically unique to that domain, and that's all kind of priming their subconscious of this for this with this intentionality of let's get towards success, let's get towards financial success, renown, status, ascending these sort of social hierarchies and so on. And you'll actually find that a great many business-minded people are very they're not unprivy to these ideas. Maybe they don't, whether or not they approach them in a very consciously, right? If they're not, maybe perhaps they're not implementing them consciously. They have a sort of intuitive sense, say, of these ideas. And then, I would also suggest that some of them actually have are consciously applying these ideas also. They're aware of the hermetic laws that supposedly govern reality, and they have studied such and have begun to implement such. I think that's a reasonably good primer, say, or exposition of these ideas, of this idea of how magic is basically this inextricably a part of one's engagement with reality, and how one sort of demonstrates how one is at the mercy of other people's magical workings, whether or not, irrespective of whether such people are aware of the fact that they are magicians working spells upon you, upon that which is around them at all times. And so I suppose also becoming aware of this, one can begin to also make to inoculate to themselves to the effect of these workings. They can become conscious of what is occurring. They become conscious of more left-handed individuals seeking to influence them in order to extract, in order to harvest certain things from them, and kind of, if not prohibit that, then make such more inconvenient for the person that is working against them. And I suppose I would kind of highlight or point towards this idea that I touched upon of spelling and language. That's kind of, I guess, a key thing to examine for someone who's skeptical of these ideas, to really sort of perhaps consider what that is, what that entails, the sort of weight that is kind of inherent to that. There are all sorts of interesting things relating to language and how language basically structures people's thoughts, outlooks, and how such governs behavior and actions. I suppose I've kind of addressed that a little bit in other recordings, but not explicitly as it relates to this, so I perhaps may get into that at some point also, but I think this sort of covers stuff for now as a basic general, the fundamentals, say. But yeah, thanks for listening anyway.